Welcome to the conference assistant. You are the first person in this conference. Please stay on the line.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Port Washington's Common Council meeting on Tuesday, August 1st. Roll call, Alderman Newmeyer is excused. Otherwise, all aldermen and women are here. Please stand and join with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with that, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Are there any questions or concerns on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Consent agenda passes. Under mayor's business, I have two items. I'm going to do the first one quickly. I just want to thank the council members and the community members who sit on our boards, commissions, and committees for attending our first annual training and norming. I also want to thank our city council, our attorney, for joining me there with our city administrator. We had boards, commission, and committee members who are appointed and serve our city in a variety of different ways come and talk about what our expectations were for their service, staying above the line and being strategic, not getting in the business of the staff, and ensuring that they were representing the core values of our community in those different components. And tonight we're looking at an ordinance to switch a few things up, so it'll be good timing and good alignment that we can stay strategic and not just chase shiny objects. So I appreciate the leadership of each of the city departments for their work in developing the charters to ensure that we stay on plan and strategy and continue to focus every day to be a premier community on the Great Lakes. So again, thank you for that. Any questions from council? Awesome. All right, well, I invited some friends tonight to come to the council meeting. So if all of our Fish Day volunteers and ambassadors, if you guys could come up over here and stand in this corner facing the screen, then don't give me that look, Mr. Gable. Get up here. So if you guys can go up there, and Alderman Gasper as well. I just have a couple of comments, but I wanted the community to be able to see who all did this. Yeah, don't block out Wendy and the ladies there. Just as long as, if you can see yourself on the,
I got bad knees.
if you're to the right of Mr. Gable, you need to move over here to the front of the council. There you go. Yeah. I really appreciate Mr. Hill getting into the senior picture pose there because it is that season and I saw those kids with their pictures. Well, anyways, City Council, City of Port Washington, I just wanted to, I wanted everyone to see this incredibly fun and diverse group of people who came together. And this represents just a small portion of them. I know that Allie couldn't be here and a couple of other young men and women who participated, but I just wanted to take a moment to make sure the community recognized that when we put out the call to, save our local tradition, you all answered in an unprecedented manner of collaboration and cooperation. Everything from Friends of Park and Rec to local businesses to our service clubs to churches, all coming together and just doing a great job. And what I really appreciated about this year's emphasis, whether that was for the parade or Thursday night or Friday night, was that you really focused on putting everything into place into a process and almost standard operating procedures so that you could go back, you could review what happened this year, and then you could just put those in place and anyone could really step in there and put those pieces together. And my favorite part is, I grew up with many of you. I've coached alongside of you or your kids or known you. And I just really appreciate the fact that you would step into that storm that we faced and in a very short period of time created something new, yet traditional, and honored all that. So on behalf of myself and the City of Port Washington and my council colleagues here, we just wanted to say thank you for that. That brought a lot of people to Port Washington. It put a lot of money into Port Washington, and most importantly, brought a lot of joy. So we're very grateful for each of you, and thank you very much for coming tonight, but most importantly, for all the time, effort, sweat, frustration, and love that you put into that, as well as your spouses and partners who put up with you zipping away. And I know she's not here, but I just did want to put out a special thanks to Danny Pfeiffer because I watched her use her triathlon strength running around Ozaukee County for tartar sauce. So that was pretty cool. But Mr. Hill, if there's anything you wanted to say, I know that you kind of led all of the ambassadors, but.
Well, myself. Leaders. So every ambassador up here was in all regard to their own leader, formed their own committees, and like you had so eloquently stated, we just wanted to honor Port Washington, honor tradition that without all the people who put in the blood, sweat, tears, effort, and energy for Fish Day all the years leading up to this, we wouldn't have even had the opportunity to do what we were able to do. The people that sit, Tony Brown there, people on the city helped us, police, fire department. There were so many different organizations, business leaders, citizens that really helped us put together something that we believe will be able to be a new reimagined tradition. So we're grateful for that.
Well, thank all of you, and thank you for coming tonight. And you are not mandatorily, you do not have to stay here for the rest of the council meeting. So.
We thought we were lured in.
Yeah, right. So if you could just raise your right hand. What? I'm on the planning commission. Yeah. Well, thank you very much from all of us, and have a great evening. With that, we're going to move into the rest of the business for the council. There are no officer or staff reports. So at this time, if there are any public comments or appearances, remember you have up to 3 minutes to speak to the council. And if you need more time than that, please contact myself or the city administrator for potential of having it placed on the common council agenda. So are there any public comments or appearances? If you could just state your name and address, and then.
Adam Shimaleski, 102 West Jefferson Street. I kind of wanted to come in today to talk about last week's meeting, about the free parking and the pay for parking situation. I pretty much want to ask City Council to actually look at the numbers that were presented in that presentation in the upcoming discussions we hopefully have for paid parking. I ran the numbers, and if you count it all up, on the peak days of September, we had almost 215 free spaces here in Port Washington. That's a lot. If you do the math, that's about 65,000 square feet of unused space if you take the worst case scenario in September here. I think what that points to is that we don't have a parking problem here, and I want to make sure that that's actually emphasized because there's so much push against change here in Port Washington because we don't have enough parking. So I want to be a voice on the other side that specifically says we need less parking and we need more space that isn't designated to parking, because a lot of different things could be used with that 68,000 square feet. That's mainly what I wanted to cover. I hope we see more public meetings and the public gets involved with that parking. I'm all for the paid parking. I think it's a step in the right direction because there's no such thing as free parking. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Are there any other public comments or appearances? Any other public comments or appearances? All right. With that, then, we're going to move into item 7A, which is the Finance and Licensing Committee, consideration and possible action on bids for wastewater treatment plant and project upgrades. The issue is, should the City Council approve a contract with August Winters and Sons Incorporated for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade? The staff recommends that the wastewater treatment plant upgrades project be awarded to August Winters and Sons, and this is in strategic alignment through the RFP process. I'm going to turn it over to Rob or Roger.
Yeah, I'll kick it off here. So this did go through Board of Public Works and Finances and is recommended by those two committees. But respecting that this is a rather large and somewhat complex project, we did ask Phil Baduzek from Strand to come and make a brief presentation on the project to go over some of the components that are included in here. Touch on the pricing and the bidding process, and I'll turn it over to Phil. So he's been working on this since 2019 when we first started putting together a needs analysis for the. Yep, when we first started putting together a needs analysis for the plant, and I'm sorry.
How many engineers does it take? Oh, sorry. I thought my microphone was off. I want to apologize. While you're filling this, while you're setting that up there, I do have to say that in the packet this week, some of the coolest words I've ever seen in the council packet were in here. Anaerobic digester roofs. I mean, this is some cool stuff. I had to Google a lot of this. Next time we come down, I need to see what all of this stuff does. A grit classifier.
Basic.
That give you enough time?
Do you want me to today?
No, I'm good. I slept through that lecture.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me. I gave pretty much the same presentation to the Board of Public Works, so I'll probably go through this a little bit quicker, but feel free to pause or stop me with any questions. So background, project costs, and schedule. So kind of the key information I will cover. Background. So the project started around October 6, 2020. So it's been kind of a long time in the making here. We completed a planning report in August of 2021. We presented that report to the Board of Public Works in January of 2022. Submitted a facilities plan to DNR in April of 2022 that was approved last October. We gave a presentation to the Board of Public Works in October of 2022, an update on the project. Plans and specs were submitted to DNR in March of 2023 and approved this June. Bids were received June 29th, and then, as mentioned, just gave a presentation to the Board of Public Works in July. Project need and drivers. The main drivers, plant age and deficiencies. The last upgrade was in the 1980s. Capacity during wet weather events. There are portions of the plant that are overwhelmed by the wet weather flows. simplifying operation. There's equipment that's, again, going on 30 years old. It's antiquated equipment. So replacing it will simplify operation for staff, regulatory changes, and then some things to reduce odors at the plant. So project costs. So updated construction costs were provided to Board of Public Works in October. Presented a range of 7.6 to 8.3 million. Those costs were based on equipment quotes from manufacturers, installation factors for that equipment, unit prices from past projects, inflation factors, the construction cost index factors. So that graph on the right is the construction cost indexes beginning in late 2018, then going through, July of this year. So you can see it was generally pretty predictable until COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, there was sharp increase, it flattened out. There was another sharp increase and then flattened out again. And now there's increases again. So that's an index that we use to help see what inflation is in the construction world. And then engineering judgment on certain items that are hard to quantify costs for, like demolition, painting, those sorts of things. We had 3 bids for the project, which for a project like this is good. Speaking with the contractors who bid on this project, they've seen a lot of projects this year come in with 1 bid or no bids even, because contractors doing this work are pretty busy. Of the 3 bids, it's fairly hard to see there, but they're very tight. Low bids, 11 million, and the next 2 bids are 11.3 and about 11.4, which for this size project, being that close to each other is great. It shows that the plans and specs were clear, so the contractors knew what they were bidding on. There wasn't a lot of ambiguity, and generally shows what the market price is for a project at this time. We did extend the schedule per contractor's request to 24 months to try and help keep the project as attractive as possible for contractors to keep the costs down. The only other major player who would do this sort of project in the area is Staub, and they indicated they weren't bidding just due to they knew that August Winter and Ahern were both bidding on the project. They're out of Marshfield, so they're a little bit farther, so they just didn't think they could compete on this particular project with the contractors they knew that were bidding. Potential reasons and feedback from the bidders regarding why the bids were higher than the estimates. I did have several manufacturers increase the equipment costs between October and when the project bid. They emphasized just costs, bidding or material costs, multiple startups for some of the equipment. The main ones that increased were the blower, sludge pumps, digester cover, and then the clarifier, energy dissipating inlets. Contractors also stress that a lot of this work is going to be done more like towards the end of next summer through the following summer. So they had to look at what predict their labor costs basically a year to 2 years out, which is something I didn't fully account for in our estimate. The blasting and painting of the digester covers and digester work in general was something that they commented on was expensive. Site access is difficult. Anyone familiar with the treatment plant sites knows there's limited access, especially to the backside of the site. So to have large cranes on site picking large pieces of equipment, it's difficult. So there were added costs there. There's some work underneath the sludge storage building where there's existing concrete fill under the building that has to be removed for new pipe installation. And then the building itself has to be underpinned, which is costly. That was something that I didn't have in that October cost. It's something during detailed design when we got into it, we realized it was quite a bit more work to secure that structure. And then just the construction sequencing, with this being a project that the existing equipment generally needs to stay in service as long as possible. we have to replace one pump at a time, get it started up, and then you can take down the next pump. So there's a lot of sequencing and a lot of different startups, which adds cost because manufacturers are flying in their equipment startup people from different states and whatnot. So it adds to the overall cost. Rate impacts. So rates effective January 1st, 2023 are listed here. So I looked at the neighboring community rates based on what they have on their websites. And currently Port is still lowest when you look at cost per 50,000 gallons. I know Mark Emanuelson, he's not here, but he did look at rates and he said a rate increase isn't required for 2024. Beyond that, I'm not sure what he's evaluated, but there won't be a rate increase required in 2024. And as you can see, the city's rates are still below all the neighboring communities. I think, do we want to pause here because that's the agenda item, and then
Any questions from council or needs for clarification? None? Okay. Keep going. Going to the agenda.
that's, yeah, then I think the construction engineering was a different item, right?
So that's the presentation on the project, and Roger and his cover memo touches on the number of systems that will be upgraded as part of the planned project. August Winter is the low bidder, and we're well familiar with them, and they're an excellent contractor, and staff recommendation is to award the project to August Winter.
Okay. This project has been reviewed. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'd be looking for a motion to approve staff recommendation. Mr. Sigwart? Mr. Sigwart, motion by Alderman Sigwart. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. Mr. Gasper, any questions or concerns on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. We get to work. Thank you. Good job. All right, the next piece is consideration of possible action on a memorandum of understanding between the Wisconsin Electric Commission and the City of Port Washington for Election Commission and the City of Port Washington for an election security subgrant of federal funds for an absentee ballot envelope subgrant. The issue is, should the City of Port Washington Common Council consider approval of this MOU between the City of Port Washington and the WEC to receive federal funds through a subgrant program to defray the costs of purchasing the redesigned absentee ballot envelopes for the 2024 election year. The recommendation from the city clerk is to approve the MOU with the WEC to receive those subgrants. Mr. Brown?
I think that pretty much covers it all. I guess the only other thing that I would add is that the cost to purchase approximately 20,000 absentee envelopes is a little over $3,000. So with this grant of $1,260, that'll reimburse the city roughly 41%. In doing so, all existing stock must be properly disposed of, and the new stock is going to be ordered in February, or prior to February 20th, 2024, which is the spring primary. What would happen is, if this is approved, the application will be submitted, and the clerk will go about ordering all of the new absentee ballots.
Okay, any questions or concerns? It's following federal guidelines and they're paying for 40% of it. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the MOU.
There's a motion, is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. All right, any questions or concerns on the motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. That brings us into Administration Committee, Ordinance 2315, amending, creating, renumbering, repealing, recreating, and revising portions of the code of the City of Port Washington by reorganizing, abolishing, or consolidating certain city departments, divisions, boards, commissions, and non-statutory committees, rescinding resolution number 2020-14, and establishing term limits for members of non-statutory boards, commissions, and committees, and amending membership of the Plan Commission. This is our second reading, so we can take action on this. And the issue is, should the Common Council approve the ordinance? And the staff recommends that we do approve it. It has been reviewed in committee. Mr. Brown.
I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but what I will go through is the updates since the August 1st meeting. There's 6 things that have been modified. The first is that the numbering scheme of the ordinance has been updated to reflect the new code and the associated section numbers. Also, that the required appointments section, that was modified to eliminate the Finance Committee, License Committee, and Administration Committee and add the General Government and Finance Committee. Also, the city clerk was added as a staff liaison to that newly created committee. The fourth item is that all aldermanic appointments, terms to BCCs was delineated in the specific BCC section. So for example, for the Plan Commission, it would say that the amount of aldermanic individuals that are appointed to it along with their term. The same goes for staff liaisons. And then the last item is that it was clarified that the terms served prior to the effective date of the ordinance do not count against the term limits identified in this ordinance. So with that, the recommendation is approval, and the recommended motion would be I move that ordinance 2023-15 be approved, or motion to accept staff's recommendation.
Any questions or concerns on the agenda item? Is there a motion? Mr. Sigwart?
I just have a question, quick one. We have one of the recommendations is to have the administrator from the school district be a non-voting member of the Plan Commission. Is there any precedence for that in the area? I mean, have you seen that anywhere else?
No, and as a matter of fact, I actually talked to several assemblymen and women and a senator about it because of just the weird nature. Weird's the wrong word. The unusualness of it, but then also more importantly, the strategic nature of having the school district on the front end of our pieces. So we would be the first in the state to do such a thing. You're welcome. Any other questions? Mr. Plaitner?
Yep, I would move to approve ordinance 2023-15.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. All right, any questions on the motion? All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, excellent. Mr. Brown?
If I could, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for that, by the way, because that was a lot of work on the part of staff, the city attorney, and also the administration committee. So definitely appreciate it. Having said that, we'll probably have to have a quick special meeting at some point between now and the 15th or on the 15th to just make the appointments to the General Government and Finance Committee. So that committee is then able to actually meet on the 15th, because there are a number of, I don't want to say pressing, but issues that are certainly on a timeline that we'd like to achieve certain things.
And with that, and thank you for that, is I also wanted to thank Alderman Newmeyer and Alderman Tierney because they both, I spoke with both of them and they voluntarily had said, yep, I'm off administration and we'll keep the Finance Committee the way it is. So no shift in the Finance Committee as we go into this year. And I also wanted to thank the council because I think it's important for us, as part of our strategy is to be in alignment with the different objectives that we identified, but also to reduce the footprint of government, help the staff become more kind of laser focused on their objectives and their goals and kind of get out of the way of creating some noise. So I'm really, really proud of you guys for this and I love this. So thank you for that.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
are we still short on citizen appointments in some of the committee? Are you still looking for people?
So I have I have one opening right. We have one opening right now on the Harbor Commission, and I think we're going to put out, or if we have not already, we've put out the application process for that and begun looking for that. But no, otherwise.
We had these folks here earlier, so.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. All right. Wayne's doing enough otherwise too. All right, so the next agenda item then, and thank you all for that, is from the City Boards and Commissions Board of Public Works, consideration and possible action on a proposal from Miller Engineers for final engineering and plan development of North Beach and Upper Lake Park Bluff rehabilitation. The issue is, should the city enter into an agreement with Miller Engineers and scientists to provide final engineering and design of improvements to stabilize the bluff at Upper Lake Park and protect North Beach from future bluff slides? The staff recommends the approval of Miller Engineers and Scientists' proposal for final engineering and plan development of North Beach and Upper Lake Park, and the recommended motion is to approve the staff recommendation. Bob and team.
Okay, so you may recall that last June of 2022, we had a rather significant bluff slide on North Beach, which caused the city to close North Beach for the year. Receding lake levels allowed us to reopen the beach this year and clear out the area that had, that was not from the major slides, but some kind of micro slides that had occurred over previous months to that. But because of the beach closure, working with Lakeshore Natural Resources Partnership, LNRP, assisted us and assisted the city in writing a grant that we received from the Fund for Lake Michigan to perform schematic engineering on the bluff and beach. And Miller Engineers and Scientists was hired to perform that work. They completed their work in spring of this year and made a presentation to the Board of Public Works at their May meeting. Simultaneously, last year in November, I submitted a grant application through Wisconsin Coastal Management to take schematic engineering to final engineering, and that grant was awarded by Wisconsin Coastal Management, essentially providing 40% of the final design cost to be paid for by Wisconsin Coastal Management. And so this came before the Board of Public Works at our July meeting, and there's a recommendation by the Board of Public Works to proceed with final engineering and design. But since the council has not seen the recommendations from the schematic engineering, we wanted to present that to the council this evening and kind of launch that into essentially the next phase, which is final design. So Emily Bloom is here from Miller Engineers and Scientists, and she'll lead the discussion, and Roger is here as well, Roger Miller.
And then I have a presentation.
Yep.
That is not be on.
It's close, though.
Close. I mean, it is a beach, so who knows?
There we go.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction. So like Rob was saying, we had high water levels in 2019 and 2020, resulting in significant bluff failures along the bluff system between Upper Lake Park and the North Beach, resulting in some soil slides that had prevented access, pedestrian access to the remainder of the beach, as well as getting in proximity of the existing road that's the northbound portion. So we were hired to take a look at the site assessment, do a site assessment, and look at the site-specific conditions. So these are just some photos that were taken of the soil slide that had occurred. That the upper left photo showing the access being prohibited, and the lower right photo showing the proximity of the road to the current crest and top of the bluff. So to take a look at the site assessment and determine what measures can be done to improve bluff stability, we had submitted our schematic engineering planning proposal, and that consisted of going further along with our concept plan by doing a topographic and bathymetric survey to get the geometry of the lake bed and the bluff, perform several soil exploration borings, and use that information in conjunction with the borings that have already been performed in 2012. Wave and shore erosion analysis, and then developing schematic plans and estimated construction costs, as well as looking at grant sources. So this information was compiled into this existing conditions base map. The most notable information being that there is a saturated silt and sand seam that is within the lower half of the bluff, and that is causing some additional bluff instability in addition to the typical bluff recession that you can expect from high water levels and fluctuating Lake Michigan water levels. So that is indicated in blue, and it's relatively continuous between the southern portion of the park all the way to about 2/3 up of the park. But there was some sporadic seam integration in the northern third where it wasn't as continuous, and that part of the bluff is actually still vegetated, thus showing us that it's relatively stable in that northern third portion. And here's a photo that we had taken. You can see that saturated seam in the lower portion of the bluff. It's that darker brown seam that's along there. So physical evidence that we have this saturated seam not only further along into the bluff face where we did our borings, but also on the bluff face itself where that water is seeping out and exiting the bluff system. We expect that this water is sourced from the Valley Creek that is to the north and northwest of the park itself. Again, we had the relatively continuous seam that was shown in our borings as well as just looking at the bluff face itself. So this water that is within the creek is traversing along that seam and exiting onto the bluff face itself.
I'm sorry, I don't normally do this. Do you mind going back? So I can't tell from that. Are the elevations of the creek in that seam the same? Or is the creek higher than the seam?
So it depends on where you're looking at the creek. So in that dashed red part, which might be a little bit difficult to see, but it's in the northern third of the image. So in that dashed area is the same elevation that is matching the saturated silt and sand seam. So the water that is coming from that creek is only entering that seam and that elevation location across that swath of area. So the further south that you go, the creek continues to cut through the bluff, so then it's no longer sourcing that seam.
And the reason I asked is, interestingly, if you go onto the creek side along the bike trail, a lot of us, you'll walk the creek when it's frozen in the winter, and you can see that sand seam, and it's actually much larger on that side. So I guess I never thought that that's actually just a little underwater river that's ripping out on the other side.
Right. So the bluff system that was created is primarily that lean clay, but we do have these interbedded silt and sand.
I like how you said that, the bluff system that was created.
Well, I mean,
it was like on the 5th day.
Probably a little later than that. But this system has the lean clay where it's less permeable for water to be flowing through. And then we have these isolated silt and sand seams that were deposited that are not continuous spatially as far north, but in this lower 2/3 is relatively continuous. And it may undulate to be thicker and thinner in certain locations, and that really drives where we're seeing the water and the bluff instability. So we may have some locations where it tapers out, particularly on the north third where we're not having the bluff issues, as opposed to the south 2/3 where we're seeing the issues and it is thicker. So here are some oblique images from 1996 showing the wastewater treatment plant on the left photo, and then progressing further north. It's not across the entirety of the bluff system, but you can see that even in 1996, during a prior high water period, we did have bluff instability in this area, as evidenced by the bare slope that you can see on the left photo particularly, and a portion of the right photo. So again, it it matches quite closely with where we're seeing the high volume of water flow at the lower third of the bluff, as well as the vegetation where we're starting to see that taper out and bluff stability improving. So Lake Michigan water levels fluctuate as much as 6 feet. So again, we have our bluff instability that's triggered by both the water seam and the silt and sand layer, as well as from our Lake Michigan water levels that are fluctuating. So during high water periods, we're getting erosion along the toe of the bluff, which creates steep scarps, which then propagate up the bluff, causing the natural typical recession that we see along Lake Michigan on the Wisconsin side. This is typically a recession rate of 50 to 100 feet per century, but this is exacerbated by our silt and sand saturated seam. So in order to allow public access back to North Beach, we had provided a design for doing some grading to remove the soil mass and cut back to the native slope at the access point. This was completed earlier this summer and is now allowing pedestrian access to continue on there. But the slope that you see that we had cut back is very similar to what we're showing for our schematic plan, which is shown here, and that's a small portion of what our schematic plan would be for the remainder of the bluff. So our schematic plan consists of 4 different segments of the project. The first being grading back a portion of the bluff face so that it is at a quasi-equilibrium geometry. Similar to what we had excavated back for the beach access. So that's shown in the green hatched area, and this is the maximum extent that we're recommending doing for this property. The second portion is of the project would be to have directionally drilled subsurface drainage lines, which are shown in purple, and those are located at the very southern end of the park, where we're having the most amount of water flow and the thickest saturated silt and sand seam. So we would be intercepting that saturated silt and sand seam westward of the bluff face itself so that we can redirect water away from that and to discharge onto the bluff, as opposed to letting it discharge on the bluff face and thereby creating stability issues. The third portion of the project would be to create a small-scale revetment, which is shown in the teal, and that's to protect the toe of the bluff from future high water periods. So in the next however long it takes for us to get back to high water periods, we would want to make sure that the bluff toe is still protected so that we don't initiate another cycle of that shoreline recession caused by the high water levels after we had just graded back the rest of the bluff. And then the fourth portion is having beach nourishment, which is shown in a shaded pink area. That's the lowest cost portion of the project, but it also provides beach aesthetics for the pedestrian use and allows reintroduction of this sand material into the system, where we're reducing that system input of the sand by putting on the revetment, so thereby trying to minimize those effects of the system itself. And in addition to the grading back of the bluff face, we also show in orange a pedestrian pathway to increase connectivity between Upper Lake Park and the North Beach. And that would be an asphalt or an asphalt paved pathway that traverses down the bluff and would be at a 12 horizontal to 1 vertical slope. I did check that since our last meeting. And that would improve the access as well as provide surface drainage by having a perforated drain line along that pathway so that we're addressing both subsurface drainage as well as surface drainage. This is the cross-section that is showing the planned improvements, with the purple line showing the directionally drilled subsurface drainage line, which does begin westward of the road as it is at this point, so that we are intercepting that saturated silt and sand seam further back from the bluff face and providing more improvement. as well as showing the cutback face, which is in the dashed line. So the solid black line would be showing what our geometry is at this point, and the dashed line is what we're recommending to improve the geometry of that slope. And then to have the revetment at the base in the teal, as well as the beach nourishment. It's helpful to note that as our water levels fluctuate, some of this revetment will be showing, with more of the revetment showing during those high water periods and less of it showing during those low water periods as sand is allowed to accumulate on the beach. So we have our estimate of probable construction costs for this maximum extent version, and we did update this table based off of our dimensioning and what we had recommended in our report to make sure it all jives. So the notable portion is that the bluff excavation pathway is 900 lineal feet. And that this part of the project, if we did this extent, would be $7.2 to $10.4 million. Alternatively, we could be looking at a reduced amount of bluff grading and reduced portions of the other portions of the project, meaning that we would only be grading the southernmost third of the bluff system and protecting that smaller portion. So while this is a reduced option, this is also stabilizing the last portion of the bluff face and the beach itself. So, so this option would still allow for that connectivity pathway down the bluff face. Any shorter and it starts becoming difficult to have that access pathway. So for this reduced amount of work, that cost would be around $3.9 to $6.6 million. If the city decides to wait, that this cycle will continue to progress. So during high water periods, we'll continue to get that erosion at the base of the bluff and continue seeing recession of the bluff system. So from 1990 to 2020, you can see that there's already been work done to relocate a portion of the road. And similarly, in this case, we would recommend at least relocating a portion of the road while it's determined whether or not additional work will be done and what extent would be done. But that would just be, but we would just be looking at, wow, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that. Well, I'm going to move forward because I don't think I need to say anything more. So the next steps would be determining what extent there would be and creating the final plans and specifications for construction-ready documents. But while that's being determined, a portion of the road should be relocated and the directionally drilled subsurface drainage line should be installed in order to provide continued use of that road instead of having it precariously close to the top of the bluff, as well as addressing the subsurface drainage issues with those drainage pipes. So whether or not construction begins next year or several years from now, those portions of the project would best be done as soon as possible, with the grading back and the pathway and revetment and beach nourishment being something that can be decided at a later date. And are there any questions about what we presented?
Council, yeah. Mr. Pleitner? I have a bunch, so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just, thanks, Alderman Denning. I guess before we get started, before we dive into questions, I guess I would just like to ask the council a general question. Tonight, we're just talking about what kind of proposal we'd like to see, what kind of engineering option we'd like to see, about $58,000 in cost. And I guess I'd ask us to say, is that $58,000 well spent if we're not going to pursue it? And if it's the stomach of the council to pursue it, then I think that $58,000 is well spent, certainly, to decide on what option we would like to pursue. So just sort of to couch my discussion points in that if we're not considering that, I would say we shouldn't, but if we are, then it's money well spent. As I was thinking about this, over the weekend. Obviously, we have a lot of big projects coming forward to the city. $11 million for the wastewater plant, public safety complex, et cetera. Projects that we're all certainly well aware of. People at home watching are certainly all well aware of. I guess for me, this is certainly a nice to have, and I was thinking about if it would be possible by pursuing option B, because I think that was the stomach and the direction from the BPW, and I would certainly concur. Would my grandchildren be able to use North Beach based on option B? That's what I was thinking about over the weekend. And if that's the case, then I think perhaps that would color my thinking in a positive light. But if that's not the case, then I would say probably not. I think it's difficult to fight Mother Nature, and so I would sort of like to think about it in those terms. That's not all I have, but I would like to turn it over to the...
Yeah, so I thought it ironic. Can you go back to the slide where you showed the 1990? And I love that in 1990 that it was still black and white pictures. But and I'm with Alderman Pleitner on this. I really struggle with this, and the reason is in 1990 I stood on that beach. I have a minor in physical geography, so that's why I got really excited about the sand strait that you were talking about, and I read that in the report. And we sat there with our professor from UWM. And he said, there's no way to stop this. There's only a way to slow it down. So my worry is to spend $10.5 million to make it look amazing, to only have one catastrophic piece happen, have one drain pipe fail, have one piece, and then have us back here down the road without a fund to sustain and push that. So and believe me, I'm down there all the time. I love North Beach. I worry that, to Alderman Pleitner's part, I'm wondering if we're asking the wrong question about trying to save what we have versus adapt the Upper Lake Park to what it was. And I don't know how far back, and this is a question for Rob, but how far back do we have data on bluff slides? I mean, and Alderman Sigwer can probably answer this. I think I was 5. No, I know, but I think I was 5 years old when, or maybe I was a little older because my youngest brother was around, but when like a huge chunk of the bluff with the road went in. And we're there now where you can see, I mean, we're yards from the road going down. And I remember on the north part, there used to be another parking lot up there. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not 1,000 years old. So if we're going to spend $10.5 million, so those are some things I'm wondering, because I struggle with the fact no man has ever beat Mother Nature. And Alderman Pleitner said something very similar. But, so I have these questions. Do we have a record of those bluff slides? Do they line up with those historic water levels? I think that's amazing. That goes back to 1860. Another wondering is, what is the impact that we made when we put the water plant there? Because you can see the sand build up and how that changes. And are we responsible for wave action shifting and ripping that up opposed to what would have naturally happened? So I have 11 questions, and I'm going to try to see if you answer them in a row. But Roger, you've got your hand up, and I know Alderman Sigwart does.
I could give you a little bit of that. I work from the geomorphologic perspective also. And your big picture questions are exactly the right ones to be looking at, big picture and long term, because we are dealing with a long-term process that has been going on for the last 12,000 years since the lake was essentially in its present condition. 4,500 years ago, because of the Earth's crust, isostatic rebound, and a bunch of other things, water levels actually average about 13 feet higher. But we've been at this level for 4,500 years, and the cycles that we see for the last 150 years have been verified with some radiocarbon dating in the ridges and swales that matches the same range of levels and kinds of cycles for the last 4,500 years. And Tuncer Edel and George Michelson at UW-Madison started their erosion studies in the early 70s that are well documented, that show us the long-term erosion rates on this side of the lake. On the other side, the rates are over twice that because they have more stronger prevailing wind. And instead of the tough clay banks that we have here, they're post-glacial outwash sand and gravel.
Yeah.
So at any rate, in answer to your question, the wastewater treatment plant does not aggravate or cause problems for the North Beach. Long-term looking at it, and in addition to the 1990 photo, the photo you have just above the entry hall from 85, and you always see in every photo the southern third always completely eroding, and the northern third quite stable with vegetation still, and then that transition zone in the middle. So the question is, if we do nothing, let's say in this generation, what you'll gradually have, you could keep moving back the road and lose parkland on top, and then you'll increasingly flank the north side of the wastewater treatment plant, which is not a major issue. And you've got, two or three more generations before that's an issue with respect to the playground and stuff like that. So jumping forward to, well, you can't stop Mother Nature. And actually, you can in the following manner. And Em alluded to, whenever we start preventing the erosion of the lake, that erosion of sediment, and only about 10% of it are the right sizes of sand and gravel. The rest is silt and clay that lays out. So our clay bank erosion is an inefficient source of lake bed sediment, and all the sand and gravel we have is from the prior millennia of erosion. But so whenever we put in, stop that erosion, especially to the north, because we have an average migration from north to south, the long-term sustainable approach is wherever we've got enough value of land and stuff that we don't want to let it keep progressing, and whenever that land is not valuable, you must let it keep progressing, in the county, you can do beach nourishment. And that's relatively economical because in our Kettle Moraine area, we've got the well-sorted sand and gravel that's just the right size stuff and the same mineralogy. So you can actually, if you match your artificial beach nourishment to whatever the migration is, then you can be sustainable forever. And at this particular spot, the reason we're recommending you do something is because this spot, with each harbor that we have, interrupts that long-term littoral drift. On the other side, it's aggressive enough, there are formal bypassing programs of the sand, that we have very little longshore, north to south migration. I had expected when, Rob, could we jump to a Google Earth and go up in the air higher, or Em? We're going to jump up higher and look at the whole harbor area, or north of the harbor. As we did the bathymetric survey, I was expecting a fair amount of accumulation of sand.
It might not be shareable from your format. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm going to go over here if I may. I was expecting to see a fair amount of, sorry about that, sand accumulating in here long-term from that long-term migration. But it's rocky and cobbly here, and there's soft organic silt here. So actually, we're not getting a bunch of migration and accumulation, and even pretty rocky here. So we have tiny bits of accumulation here that's occurred over the last 30 or 40 years since this was done. It shows us that our migration rate is pretty low, so it's pretty efficient to put some beach nourishment because it's not going to be a high rate of removal. So at any rate, and I would when we did the maximum extent, That's the maximum that we were even willing to let you consider. We don't actually want you to do that much because we have a philosophy that do no more change to the natural system than you really need. So not only is it Public Works recommendation, but our recommendation is to do the reduced version. You could even reduce some components a bit more, but then, as Em said, if you do less bluff stabilization, you won't have quite enough for that traversing pathway, which is, in addition to letting us intercept water on the top, flowing on the surface of the bluff, that also gives good access for bluff vegetation maintenance.
So, Rod,
Go ahead.
So where has this worked? Like where on the Great Lake, where on our side of Lake Michigan can we go? Like Concordia is now having problems with their project.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, Concordia was a massive nightmare that should never have been allowed. Their revetment extended 80 feet out into the lake. In fact, right after it was built, I ended up doing shore protection for the first 3 properties south had horrendous erosion, and this was during the historic low water period where no erosion was occurring on the Great Lakes. I worked for the next 6 properties south. That never should have been allowed. What Concordia should have and could have done is just the kind of approach we recommend here. They did cut back the bluff face, a very minor revetment at the toe, and beach nourishment. Would have had no adverse effects whatsoever.
Yeah, but somebody had to have convinced Concordia through expertise, science, and everything else. And that's why, like, where has this worked? And I'm not challenging you.
Beach nourishment is done in many places around the world. On the Indiana, Michigan side, it's done. The first revetment...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just have to understand this, because to me, this is a huge strategic piece for us. It's succession planning. It's a lot of money to keep coming out. And those are sand-based pieces where I don't know that they have a creek on the other side that's feeding through, that can undercut all of this. I mean, so...
Well, we've addressed the source. That water seep, when you go to the beach now and go on the asphalt path, you see the water seep across the path?
Yeah.
That's the water seep so if we look at highest benefit cost dollars, let's not even worry about the whole enchilada. First thing is, it was about right time 3 years ago to move the segment of the road. Edge of pavement is actually 11 feet from top of scarp right now. Do that this fall or this winter, because otherwise you may lose your northbound road next spring. Anytime soon, do the directionally drilled lines to intercept that water. And you've got, I don't know how much of fill for the traffic that has to be done for the wastewater treatment plant for 2 years goes around the east side, but even if it doesn't, I wouldn't proceed with bluff cutback because it's a lot of truck traffic which would be coming around the east side, but even if your work doesn't need that, it would be congestion. So the major bluff work I would put only after your wastewater treatment plant stuff is done. I would spend less than half the cost of the big budget. Senator Baldwin has an application in to fund perhaps 100% of the construction cost. We'll find out about that this November. So the question is design. Your question, should we do any design if we're never going to use it? The answer is no. If you don't do the design now or don't do the work now, you'll just end up doing it later. You could still defer it because it's been deferred a generation or two. One of the reasons I do encourage it, after the 86, in terms of does this work? The beach that I live at, I have 180 feet of frontage south of Sheboygan in the town of Wilson. I designed that revetment plus one south for the then owners in 85. I bought it in 88. So that revetment and about 50 others I've done 20 and 30 years ago, didn't even need beach nourishment, are doing just fine.
Okay, well, and Roger, I'm just going to
Yeah,
interject here for a second because I
Yeah.
want to make sure other council
yeah,
have the chance to ask you some questions. So if you can just hit a hard pause for a second.
you bet.
Rob, I have a question for you. So if we were to go through all of this, what type of fund would we have to put in place to be able to sustain all of this, right? So, I mean, we're talking about drilling into the bluff, putting in drain tiles, things that fail, have to be maintained. And again, please don't hear me as saying I don't want to fix the bluff. I just am very concerned about the future financial burden we will put on the community if we don't do this right. And if we do it, what is the liability down the road? Because we have a lot of projects that have not, and no fault looking backwards because we can't, but we have a whole lot of liabilities right now in the city for really good ideas that were not funded in the future. That's a super long question. I apologize, but go.
No, well, starting with the drainage system, my understanding is that those are essentially maintenance-free.
Correct.
Should last many
Seven-
lifetimes.
Well, I would give them, it may be 100 years, but it might only be 60 or 80 years.
Okay.
You never know.
So we need to hire Roman engineers because their stuff is still being used.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's plastic pipe, right?
Yeah, but it's in the ground and protected, so you don't have the UV exposure. We designed special filter criteria for it to match those grain sizes, so it ought not to be clogging.
Yeah, I mean, as far as ongoing maintenance, I mean, one thing's for certain, we'll have ongoing maintenance if we don't do anything. Now, it'll never amount to $2 million or $7 million to continually clear the beach, even if it's every year. I guess the value I see in this project, and I think Roger touched on it, is even though nature is dynamic, and so there's always going to be a changing landscape due to nature, I think the work that's being proposed now is going to last 100 or hundreds of, I mean, we're talking about geologic time, I think, when you talk about changing, if we get.
Yeah, the question would be, at what point in time might it deserve some additional beach nourishment? I'm hoping that's at least a generation away.
I think the mayor is talking about failure of the bluff.
Oh, for the part that gets cut back and drained and toe protected with revetment, that should be long-term stable because that matches the long-term stable slope in areas where there's not toe recession. So that's the design criteria for that. That does leave the northern half of the park unprotected, but that's had a much lower erosion rate, and it doesn't have the seepage, and you have plenty of park land there. So
Okay.
to me, that's allowable.
I just, my last thing, and I'm going to stop talking. I want to give council the opportunity to speak, but I just remember as a kid going down to the beach in revetment, they used to throw old chunks of sidewalk and old chunks of road down there, and they're gone.
Sure.
So, I mean, even
This is not
rocks
that.
down there are not going to stay.
Well, no, a well-designed, like I said, the revetments I designed in 86 and 87 are still just as good as they were then.
And Whistling Straits currently is not struggling with any of this either.
Yeah, they made major mistakes. Also,
Everybody but the people who worked with Roger Miller, right? I'm saying that tongue in cheek because, like, I don't. That's my research was I can't find anybody up and down the bluff in a public setting where it's worked.
Well,
That's my worry.
Why don't you talk about
well, back to our proposal. We had a map with about 80 projects, many of them private, but about 30 municipal projects of beach naturalizations in urban sites. Many of those were just done, 15 years ago. Many of them didn't need revetments because there were a wide range of projects, but yeah, you can make it work. And in long term, it's relatively economical if you scale it back like we said. The cross-section of the revetment we show is not more than 3 or 5% of the stone of ton of cross-section that Concordia did. It's less than 10% of the revetment cross-section you have in the front of the wastewater treatment plant, which is necessary to protect a very important vital structure. So we take a pretty light, minimalist approach to give nature as much room as it can have, and only intervene when the land use or owner decides it's necessary. And that's your decision. You can decide to not do it. But you may actually have congressional money that pays for construction, but you wouldn't be able to take advantage of that unless you have a shovel-ready design.
Correct. And please don't, I'm not being critical of you. This is something near and dear to, I think, all of us. And it's not even a wonder, it's a worry of being able to sustain it and not pass a liability on to, other generations. And it's Lake Michigan. It's a huge body of water and it does what it wants to do. And that's why I appreciate both plans. Alderman Plaitner, I'm going to let you go again.
It's also important to look at our plan. We do include, and it wasn't discussed during this presentation because it would go into some significant depth of information. But in our plan, we do discuss the wave and shoreline analysis. We'd be happy to talk you through that. But when looking at revetment designs, a lot of the times in the past, what was done was placing the chunks of the concrete and the sidewalk and the rebar on the slope. And that material is quite flat and very reflective, and it wasn't constructed as a design in its location. So when looking at a revetment, it's not simply dumping rocks onto the beach. It's also looking at what is the lake bed geometry, and thus how much energy can we expect to see at the location that we're placing our revetment. So because we're placing our revetment as far inland as we possibly can without cutting back the bluff and doing significant additional grading, we're minimizing the amount of energy that's actually reaching that revetment itself. So A, we're reducing the energy that we're placing it at. B, we're using the bathymetric information in that area to determine what energy we can expect to see there, and thus using ACOE design to determine what the stone sizes should be to adequately address that energy. So for example, the wastewater treatment plant where it's further out, you have larger stones because it is farther out in the lake and it's exposed to more energy. But the revetment that we're talking about here is placed further back and thus has less energy.
Two quick things to finish up for me. I'm definitely focused on alternative B. Looking at the bluff excavation and pathway, that 600 linear feet for the pathway, how beneficial to the project is that pathway? Is it a aesthetic and a pedestrian purpose, or how purposeful is it in holding back the bluff?
Right. So when we were talking about bluff recession, we're talking about wave energy that is creating steep scarps that propagate up the slope, natural bluff recession. You also have bluff instability that's caused by saturated silt and sand seams. But the third that this grading and a pathway would be beneficial for is for this natural surface erosion that's occurring. So we have natural freeze and thaw cycles here in Wisconsin, and that destabilizes the upper couple of feet of the bluff itself. So you have a natural shallow sliding that occurs continuously. But having vegetation that has deep roots is extremely important in having these root systems that are able to hold together the soil itself. So it provides protection from that freeze-thaw cycle. So having this vegetation and having a maintenance access path to continue working on that, as well as having that surface drainage is all beneficial, whether or not it's a aesthetic pathway for pedestrians to use or simply a maintenance access path is up to you.
Thanks. That's very helpful. The other thing that makes me think about is what as a city we would like Upper Lake Park to be, knowing that the northern half of Upper Lake Park is a lot more stable. The bluff in that area is a lot more stable than the southern half. Does that does that color our decision making, right? So if that's something that, if we decide not to pursue this, if we decide to pursue option B versus A, knowing that the southern side is a lot weaker than the northern side of the park, you know, I know we're kind of loath to form task force or committees or subcommittees or what have you, but have we thought about what we want Upper Lake Park to be in the future? If we're talking about possibility playground falling into the lake in 2 or 3 generations, should we?
When we initially started talking with Rob, we said that this component should be examined within the context of a long-term master plan for that park, just for that reason, because you could do that. And the only issue, which wouldn't be major to deal with, but would be something to deal with as the southern portion recesses and slides for those reasons and begins to flank the wastewater treatment plant. But you can continue to protect that north flank. And even just with beach nourishment does a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions, Mr. Sigwart?
I'm not sure this is a question, Mayor. When I came to Port 50 years ago, the wastewater plant was being converted from a primary plant to a secondary plant. And that required some extensive work on the bluff that would be south of the area where we're working now, which you would call the lookout area, Mayor, okay? And we pretty much stabilized that bluff by putting in a tow revetment away from the lake, okay, a wall, so we could reduce the slope, and you notice that's pretty stable, right? Subsequent to that, Tom Jensky, who was assistant city engineer when I came here in '72, laid out the access. Can you go back to the overhead that shows the road relocation today? Keep going back. You've got a better slide. Wait a minute, where is it? Go for it.
I think we went by it.
You know the one I mean, right? The bird's eye view of the. Okay, where is it? Right there, go back. There we go. Okay. If you look at that, the first thing that he did was use a garden hose to lay out the curvature. It's not, Rob, correct geometric curvature, as you know. Roger, you know that too. It was laid out with a garden hose because we had erosion occurring that was visible, right? So we, then when Tom left and Barrett Gensen came in, he relocated the road further west to see that's why we have the whoopee in it now, right? Because we were fearful we were gonna lose that whole face, okay? So I guess my point truly is this on? Okay. We must do the design now. And I say that because we put it off for 50 years. We're not talking about delaying this for 5 years, okay? During Mark Gottlieb's reign, which I don't know what years were those, Mayor? That 20 years ago?
Say 96.
Okay. There was a proposal to cut half of Upper Lake Park away. And that was going to be, I don't know, back then it was $16 million or something, but to cut back the slope flat enough all the way to the middle of Upper Lake Park, there would be no possibility playground today, okay? And that was deemed to be extreme because they really didn't study the stability of the final slope. They just did it in a way that it wouldn't erode. So now we have an opportunity to design what I think is a good plan for the stabilization of the bluff in the future, regardless of when we do it. We have so many priority items. I was just talking to Roger about that when we came in tonight. We have so many priority items that seem to start with $10 million or $7 million, okay? So I think it's really important to get the design done so we are ready in case there is money sooner than later. In other words, I don't want to see us delay the design. I also don't want to see us commit to construction. So the idea in my mind is to do a good, stable design. We would do plans and specifications, but no bid documents. That would come at the time that we would go ahead with the work. So being shovel ready means that your design is complete, and you're ready in 30 days to put it out to bid. And that's the position I think we should be in, just in case money's available.
Thank you, Alderman Segal. I 100% agree. I just, as somebody who went and got a minor in this, like this is near and dear to my heart, and I don't want to be in a position where, because in 50 years, I'll be 102 years old, but Jonathan's grandkids will be running around up there, and it's important to me that we do this really well and that it's sustainable. So if you heard anything different tonight, I'm just challenging. We always have these, we can do this, we can do this. I remember the plan to rip it apart and it would disappear. And it's a can we cannot kick down the road because we won't have a road. I just heard Roger say that if we don't do something by spring, it's going to be gone. So, I mean, yeah, I would like to see that both plans put in place. You're the council, you'll decide. And I also agree with having a shovel-ready project. I just worry about how are we going to fund it? And what promises will we accidentally make to the community if we don't do it, because we have to do it. So, Mr. Gasper?
Couple things. First off, I'm very satisfied with the engineering efficacy of their plans. I think it's as good as we're probably going to find without spending an order of magnitude more money. I just wanted to bring up one thing that was brought up before the Board of Public Works that was not mentioned tonight is in the difference between alternative A and alternative B, that design-wise, if they go forward with alternative B, that's getting us something like 90% of the way to alternative A if the federal government should decide that they want to reward us for all the millions of dollars we spent on fixing their break wall. So, if that were to change, that's not a huge jump if we direct them to do B right now. I also want to add a question probably for Rob on this. So we have a coastal management grant that would pay up to 40% of the design on this. I presume that is tied to this project alone. It's not just 40 grand we can spend on something else if we decide we're not going forward with this?
It's this project.
Yes. Okay. So right now that gets us 40% of the way towards, which could be up to $40,000 towards having a shovel-ready project ready to go if, additional funding comes available. Because I don't see us putting together $10 million out of this Common Council. I mean, currently I think we're already probably going to be, the Common Council has spent more money than any other Common Council in the city's history. So we can add another 10 million and really make sure it can never be surpassed. But I think I'd rather wait for another funding source to come available on that. Yeah, I guess I'm in favor of going forward with the design at this point because, if we get this design and it sits there for 5 years, there's not going to be a lot of changes, 5 or 10 years in the future that are going to have to be made to this. So it's mostly what would happen that would be the most changes if we went all the way to bid documents and then had to rewrite bid documents. That would be a change. But the design itself is not, you wouldn't see much in change if you wait a decade or probably even 2 decades other than the pipe material. Yeah, I'm in favor of going forward with this right now. We have 40% of the money secured, and that then gives us the option of waiting until there is a funding source to pay a significant portion of the rest of the work. Or we could even go forward with it piecemeal and do a part of it coming up and wait on the rest of it till later.
And just for clarification for the audience and the community, the remaining dollars, the other 60% was budgeted, so it's not like we're finding more money. And I don't want to be on the record spending council, Mr. Gasper.
I think it's too late.
Any other question, Mr. Tierney?
This is actually maybe more for our engineers that are here. Mike, you just said that if we waited 5 or 6 years down the road, the plan would still be, from my own experience, I'm just wondering if we wouldn't see another 20,000 or 25,000 having to be spent to make sure the plan still works. I mean, you guys are in that field. What do you think of that?
Well, my experience is more in highway design type stuff, and in that respect, if you did a shelf plan, you could design it and stick it on the shelf. And I've been doing highways for DOT projects for over 20 years now. And a project that we did 20 years ago, we could pretty much pull off the shelf. And in that case, the changes would be a couple minor changes in standards. Some of the materials and stuff have been redefined slightly, and you'd have to change item names, stuff like that. But for the most part, something like this doesn't have FHWA looking over its shoulder trying to make sure that you're fitting its standards. So you don't really have to worry about adjusting to the future standards like that. But for the most part, a design like this, you should be able to pull off the shelf and at some point in the future, and with very minimal adjustments. Like I said, probably the pipe material would be the biggest thing that's most likely to change in the future. I don't know if this would be PVC or HDPE at this point, most likely. Those will last pretty much forever, and who knows what next generation of plastic pipe comes out. But, rocks is still going to be rocks for the riprap. The sand gradation is not going to change because we're trying to match the gradation of the beach. So a lot of that type of work is going to stay the same. If you come and decide that after the fact that we need to change the grade on the slope on the path or something, yeah, something like that we come up and change what we want to do, that could add extra cost. But I don't see that it would be a big difference, and they might be able to follow up on that a little bit better.
Right, and that is, for the most part, correct. The only part that would be changing is as the future progresses and we have future soil slides, the amount of grading would change. And if you end up waiting for another cycle of high water period, then our new toe of the bluff would also change. But the design itself of placing the revetment as far into that toe as we can and grading back the slope to the 2.25 on one and 2 on one in other locations would still be the same. So it would just be refining what the grading would be and potentially even having less mass to deal with of the soil because Mother Nature will take care of part of it until you get to the next high water cycle.
And in thinking about water cycles, that low period that we had from 2000 to 2015 is not going to occur for another 60 years. It happens about every 80 years. The one anomaly during the Dust Bowl was at 28, 29. So we're probably going to see peaks and valleys like we saw from the 50s through the 60s. So what we're probably going to see within 2 or 3 years now, we're probably going to have a 100-foot wide beach. And people will say, well, we don't need to do anything, do we? Until then, it pops right back up. So our peaks average 11 years plus or minus a couple. So in all probability, we're not going to see any new toe erosion for another half a dozen years. So the probability of having to do any significant change to design, even if you get a little bit of toe erosion, is not that big a deal. But things ought to be very much the same, even looking like you don't need to do it 5 years from now. But then that fools you because it comes up quickly.
The best day to plant a tree, though, right?
Yes.
Mr. Sigwart?
Just for clarification, Emily, there is no final design work in the park itself.
That's correct. The only portion of the Upper Lake Park that we have within our proposal is for the relocation of a portion of the road, which can be done by the city or by us, whichever you prefer.
Mr. Benning?
I guess I have to agree with most of my peers up here that it probably makes sense to move forwards with the final engineering on this, but as has been stated a number of times, we've got a lot of $10 million plus projects potentially coming at us, especially with the growth rate that we're seeing in the infrastructure we need to support that. So I would want to make sure we've got some focus, Rob, on grants or the senators. This is federal money dollars probably that would come through this. So. Barring any other comments or questions, I would make the motion that approve the staff recommendation.
Excellent. Is there a second to the motion to approve staff recommendation?
Sorry.
Oh.
Second?
Yeah, okay, second, sorry.
So, quick question, clarification on the motion. So is that to recommend, staff recommendation for alternative B? Or is it open-ended to allow for either? Sorry, as I'm reading the memo, I don't see clarification.
And I would clarify the Board of Public Works recommendation on alternative B.
So the way that motion would be accepted then would be recommend approval of the Miller Engineering and Scientists proposal for final engineering and plan development of North Beach and Upper Lake Park Bluff Rehabilitation B. I'm asking.
Yes.
Benny. What's that? Alternative B. Okay. Before we take a vote on that, Rick, you had something you want to make sure we knew?
I did, thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify that in the packet is the proposed agreement and the letter of transmittal, et cetera, conditions of the contract. They're all dated July 10th. There's a later iteration of that dated yesterday. There's no change on anything I believe that the council is concerned with. Roger and/or Emily deleted a section that's just not pertinent to this job. I thank them for that. So the iteration you'd be acting on is more recent, dated July 31st.
Thank you. All right, so there's a motion and a second. Again, one more time, the motion is to approve the Miller and Engineering Scientists proposal for final engineering and plan development of North Beach and Upper Lake Park Rehabilitation Alternate B. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Excellent. And to our scientists and engineers, thank you. It's just a passionate issue, and I never ask this many questions. So thank you. Quiet. All right, so the next consideration and possible action on a task order from Strand Associates for construction-related services for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. The issue is, should the city enter into an agreement with Strand Associates to provide construction-related engineering services for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade project? The staff is recommending the approval of the task order for constructed-related services for the wastewater treatment plant. Roger, or Rob? Roger.
And we'll have Phil come back up. So earlier tonight, we approved the awarding of the construction contract or award to August Winters. So basically the engineering is not done. We need engineering help during the construction to make sure that it gets built the way it was designed. There's a lot of submittals and shop drawings that are provided to us that we want to make sure that that is Strand's intent and for continuity and basically to keep Strand liable for the project. We would like to have them do the construction phase engineering also. I do want to point out in my memo, similar to what Rick just pointed out, Strand has addressed their certificate of insurance concerns, so that element is taken care of. And from here, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Thanks, Roger. Do you have some slides here?
Phil, I have a list of 21 questions for you.
That's it? It's tough
Totally
to follow
kidding.
the bluff one.
This is way out of my element. I don't.
The bluff is a lot more tangible than the treatment plant, so.
Council, I've one other comment too that while they're setting this up. we had Strand bring to us their proposal for this work prior to opening bids. So it's not based on an $11 million job. It's based on our estimate at $9 million. So
Well,
even
thank you.
Even though it's a high number, their 750,000 is what we're awarding Strand, or potentially if you go forward.
So
It is based on a $9 million construction
So,
estimate.
Roger, whether it's 9 or 11, their 750 is fixed.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we need to.
I was going to say,
change that. I can just
council, do
kinda-
you have any questions? I mean, this has been thoroughly reviewed, so is anyone prepared with any questions, or is there anything you want to add to what we've reviewed in our packet? Mr. Sigwart?
I want to bring it to everybody's attention. I spent about the last 40 years of my career instructing construction observers, okay? Not for wastewater plants, not for water filtration plants, but for normal, what I'd call highway or street construction or utility construction, which generally speaking is pretty straightforward, okay? The comparison I want to make is that if you hire a landscaper to do your yard and you want to inspect it, all you really need is somebody that understands landscaping, right? If you're going to have a house built, you're going to need a plumbing inspector, an electrical inspector, a structural inspector, a roofing inspector, because the house is more complicated. So my question primarily, Phil, is as the different phases of construction at the wastewater plant, we're going to need different expertise by the people on site. We're going to need people that are going to be familiar with the electrical systems when we put in the control center. We're going to need people that are familiar with roofing, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So your observer will be different people at different times, is that correct?
We'll have one primary observer,
Right.
and he'll kind of be the eyes and ears for the other disciplines you're talking about, you know, structural, electrical, mechanical, those sorts of things. But electrical is the one caveat where we have our electrical engineer come on site periodically and look at things. Now, fortunately, a lot of the stuff, it's not buried. So you can come and see it after the fact, or you can take pictures and relay that information to the others. So yeah, it'd be primary person on site would be generally familiar with all disciplines, but then the electrical is so specialized that we have our electrical engineer, you know, on site periodically.
Your primary person is going to be quite experienced.
Yeah.
No, you're 15-year experience type guy? Or
It won't be that much. It'll be more in the 5 to 10 range.
But they'll be familiar with wastewater
Yes.
plant inspection.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll be heavily involved. Honestly, I'm project manager for it, so I'll be just as involved as anyone. I'll be fielding all the contractor questions and that sort of thing.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, be looking for a motion to approve.
I would make the motion to approve the Strain Associates task order for construction-related services for the wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Alderman Sigwart. Any questions or concerns on the motion? All right. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Excellent. Thank you. Well, good luck.
Okay. Thank you.
This is a significantly important part of our infrastructure. All right, moving on. A consideration and possible action on proposed First Amendment site agreement with T-Mobile to install additional antennas, cable, and equipment on the city's water tower at 1701 Astor Street. The issue is should the Common Council approve the amended site agreement with T-Mobile, and the staff is recommending that we do. Mr. Brown.
I think you said it all, Mr. Mayor. I don't really have much to add beyond the fact that for each of the antennas, the rent would be increased by $150 per antenna, or $450 a month. And as Alderman Gasper helped me note for my comments here this evening, $5,400 is the annual increase that we'll see. And then it'll go up 3% each year that they're in service. So with that, I would recommend approval, and the motion would be I move that the First Amendment to site agreement with T-Mobile to install additional antennas, cable, and equipment on the city's water tower at 1701 Astor Street be approved. or move to approve staff's recommendation.
Mr. Sigwart? Moved by Mr. Sigwart. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Benning. Any questions or concerns on the motion?
One real quick question.
Mr. Tierney?
Is this improvement likely to help our citizens who are T-Mobile customers, or they still going to have issues?
Not Verizon.
I said T-Mobile. I know. I didn't expect this to help Verizon.
No, it'll help T-Mobile.
I think it probably will help with T-Mobile customers, but I can follow up and find exactly what the impact will be for customers.
Just have one comment. In the memo, it treats this as a cost. It's a revenue.
Say that again. We had a
In the
little tech
memo
issue.
to us
Yeah.
from staff, it treats this as a cost. It's a revenue.
Yeah, in the fiscal impact. Yeah, he corrected that just now. All right, there's a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. That moves us into consideration and action regarding resolution number 2023-9, authorizing preparation, execution, and delivery of satisfaction of a mortgage on a real estate property and satisfaction of mortgage relating to property at 130 to 132 Bly Parkway. Bernard Bannon and Elizabeth Bannon are the owners. Mr. Eberhard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pardon me. The parties obligated to pay this amount to the city have done so in full, according to our city treasurer. Therefore, Wisconsin statutes require that the city execute a satisfaction of the mortgage to evidence full payment of that obligation. That's the matter before you. If you approve this, then the satisfaction of mortgage, which is already drafted but not included in the packet, will be executed and delivered to the Register of Deeds office tomorrow for recording, and that will satisfy all the legal obligations pertinent to the payment. Thank you.
Any questions for the city attorney?
With the city clerk out of town, is that going to hold us up?
I believe the city clerk, as she is very forward-thinking, has already signed this in advance, and it's pending the mayor's signature later tonight.
So with that, I'll move approval.
I have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Attorney. Any questions or concerns on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Are there any public comments or appearances before we can't close out our council meeting? I had one thing that I missed in my mayor comments, and that is that I had requested the Chair of Finance, Alderman Pleitner, to develop a fiscal philosophy statement or financial philosophy statement for the council to review at our next council meeting to help guide the city in the budgeting process. I think it's important for the council to upfront set a tone and a vision of, what parameters and lanes we'd like that budget developed in, so that there's never any surprise on the back end when the budget comes back to council months later. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. So Alderman Pleitner, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we'll be recommending for review at Finance and General Government on the 15th for approval at council that same night.
Awesome. And we will have a rapid session. So if we can have 4 aldermen or women be there at 15-minute in and out meeting to approve the appointments, and there might be, maybe I'll have the Harbor Commission by then as well. So, all right, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?